The key line in there is that, to best of my recollection. I mean, Tenet, of course, has had problems up to now. I dealt with him a great deal on my last book, The 1% Doctrine. The reason reporters don't call George up to now is because he says, essentially, he doesn't remember slam dunk. He doesn't remember briefing the president before 9/11. I've known George for a long time. What I did hear as I talked to the direct participants who actually executed, were involved in the step-by-step of the process, and they testify on the record in the book. And I think people in the know, certainly in Washington, understand why George is the last man you want to call on something like this.
I want to talk about Robert Richer and John McGuire. Robert Richer, former head of CIA's Near East Division, former deputy chief of clandestine operations in the CIA, and John McGuire, the former CIA official. Talk first about their significance and them as sources for your book.
Well, you know, these people spend hours and days with me. I mean, it's not a fleeting encounter. As you know from books, I have more than 100 sources. This is my third book in 5 years in the Bush administration. The first one on Paul O'Neill, the main character, 19,000 documents. I'm an investigative reporter. These books are astonishingly thorough. And in these cases, hour after hour, we discussed exactly the particulars of these missions, especially the issue of Haboosh. So there's not a doubt as to exactly what they said to me. What's clear here, and the thing that reporters are trying to dig out, is exactly what sort of pressure was put on. Certainly Rob Richer, who's the actor in that particular statement I think you're about to read.
Robert Richer's response, again, former head of CIA's Near East Division,
Sure.
says, "I never received direction from George Tenet or anyone else in my chain of command to fabricate a document from Haboosh as outlined in Mr. Suskind's book."
You know, that's a very narrow, legalistic response. Lawyers in Washington who've called say that's actually a non-denial denial, because in terms of chain of command, Rob Richer's not actually on George's chain of command, if you will. It goes around to Rob Richer. There are people between them.
You mean George Tenet?
George Tenet. Rob Richer's not on George Tenet's chain of command specifically. You know, the fact is that this particular response is one that actually, after a day or two, as people looked at it and said, I don't think that's particularly credible. And what I did ultimately, Amy, is I posted something I've never done before as a journalist in 25 years. I don't expect to have to do it again. I actually posted the transcript of a long conversation Rob Richer and I had, digging into the particulars of this particular issue and exactly what he remembered specifically from his own experience. I put it on my website, ronsuskind.com, and that frankly quelled some of the clouds that were kicked up by
We're going to actually go to a bit of that transcript, but first we're going to break, and then we're going to get other comments on your book and have you respond. We're talking to Ron Suskind. His explosive new book is called The Way of the World, a story of truth and hope in an age of extremism. Stay with us. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report, That Music, Paddington Bear, Love Song #1. We're broadcasting on over 700 stations, on NPR and Pacifica stations, low-power FM, college and community radio stations, public access TV, and PBS TV stations, and both TV satellite networks. On Dish Network, Channel 9415, Free Speech TV, 9410, Link TV, and on Direct TV, Channel 375. And we're video and audio podcasting at democracynow.org. Our headlines are also available in Spanish, in transcript form, and in audio for any radio station to take, as over 200 are. Our guest for the hour is Ron Suskind. The Way of the World, A Story of Truth and Hope in an Age of Extremism is his explosive new book. We're talking about those who are refuting what you have to say, your sources, or kind of refuting. Now, as you said, Ron Suskind, you have posted transcripts.
They're under pressure and ducking.
Who do you think Ron Richer is under pressure from?
Well, you know, Rob Richer is, I mean, you can name a list as long as your arm right now. The White House clearly saw that this one part of it could result in impeachment hearings, and it could be a problem because they could happen rather quickly. The fact is that the evidence is all laid out edge to edge in the book. Again, I didn't rely in this book on the off-the-record sources. I have many off-the-record sources, but what I got in this book, because I understood that we might have, let's just say, dilemmas going forward, are people on the record talking at length about this particular Habush mission.
Well, the partial transcript that we'll put up right now, you say to Richer, now, this is from the vice president's office, is how you remembered it, not from the president. You're asking him, and you're talking about the letter.
He said before, when we talked about it, he says, I'm sure it's from the vice president's office. This is an effort, Amy, to drill down, almost like a deposition, to exactly what he remembers from his own experience.
So he says, no. What I remember is George saying we got this from basically from what George said was downtown, right, referring to Tenet, right, which is the White House, you ask? He says, yes. But he did not, in my memory, never said president, vice president, or NSC, okay? But now he may have hinted, just by the way he said it, it would have caused almost all that stuff come from one place only, Scooter Libby in the shop around the vice president. You say, right. Rob Richer says, but he didn't say that specifically. I would probably stand on my reputation and say it came from the vice president. You say, right, I'm with you. But there wasn't anything in the writing that you remember saying the vice president. He says, nope. You say it just had the White House stationery. And Rob Richer says, exactly right.
Yeah. We went through this over and over and over again. And Rob actually understood that this would be a very heated moment. This happens, Amy, sometimes with sources, especially these fellows here who I think are actually rather heroic. They said, I'm going to trust truth at the end of this era. These guys have been walking around in some cases with this lump in their chest for a long time. But when they stand up, embrace truth, and they get hit by a wave, and it's really a tidal wave, you know, the fact is even the stoutest find their knees buckle.
John McGuire, the former CIA official, former deputy chief of Iraq operations group
he actually
with the
ran
CIA.
Iraq. He ran Iraq for CIA. Yeah.
He said, I never received any instruction from then Chief, any Rob Richer, or any other officer in my chain of command instructing me to fabricate such a letter. Further, I have no knowledge to the origins of the letter and as to how it circulated in Iraq.
The book doesn't allege anything that he's stating there. The book shows clearly what happened. McGuire, as people read the book, they're like, that statement doesn't actually reflect what's in the book. The book just shows him talking to Rob Richer, McGuire, about the letter, about its contents, about generally its origin. And at that point, McGuire was moving on to a new job. So I say in the book, it's passed to McGuire's successor for execution. So there's an example where McGuire, who had not read the book at that point, had it characterized wrongly by Richer, whomever Richer was working with, and then responded to something not in the book. You know, it's interesting because this is part of a kind of practice of careful sort of kick-up-the-dust deception in terms of statements like this that the reporters have seen from time to time.
Let me ask you about what the American Conservative is saying, the newspaper. They're saying that the order actually went to the Office of Special Plans, headed by Douglas Feith, not the CIA.
Well, what they're saying, interestingly, Amy, is that they felt that that was the origin of the idea, was Doug Feith in the Office of Special Plans in the Department of Defense. Certainly, that may well have been part of a conversation between the White House and Feith's office Office, that, of course, those things happen 3-4 times an hour at certain times like this. And if FICE office came up with the concept, passed it to the White House, that's the same thing. Ultimately, the order comes clearly in the recollection of participants from the White House to the CIA. If the White House talked to other people and coming up with this concept, well, that's something for investigators to dig up.
Could some of the